an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Veiled Throne, Book 3 in the Dandelion Dynasty series, chapters 15, 16, and 17. In these chapters, we jump ahead in time, which I should have seen coming and did not. And it turns out dealing with families comprised of multiple peoples of different cultures is really hard in a way that I think many of us are probably sort of familiar with. But this is pretty extreme. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Hey, Kyle, if you're out there. So, these are some fraught chapters, kiddos. You know what? I am so tempted to jump into the discussion of what I mentioned in the intro right away. But first, let's get through chapter 1. Goztan Ryoto, who we have not seen for a minute at this point. Or wait, I'm in the wrong. No, that's on chapter 1. I was like, I don't even remember. Guys, sorry. It's bringing me to the beginning of this entire book. I don't know why that just happened. Here we go. Camera Obscura. That's the name of this beginning of these 3 chapters. I was like, Goztan Ryoto, what? Thank you. All right. So what we have here is the start of part 3 called Rain-Lashed Saplings. And we are back in the palace and we are getting to see Phyro again, who it turns out has still not really been given any power because his mom, there's this rumor going around that she's considering taking the throne from him and giving it to this other dude who has seemingly just shown up on the scene. I'm not entirely certain what the appeal is of this guy, that people think he stands a chance of taking over, but once we are actually in Gia's head, it doesn't seem like she's really considering that at all. It seems more like she is trying to play things so that she gets to stay in power as long as she possibly can, while making it look like somebody else is actually the threat. And it's a weird sort of balance because seeing this other guy as a threat has its own uses, but he's only a threat because it's allegedly possible, according to the rumors, that she may be willing to deny her stepson his crown that he is, supposed to be. And it's not a real crown because technically Fara is supposed to be the inheritor, but the sense I really get is that nobody really expects to see Fara again. Not necessarily in that she's dead, or it just seems like functionally her being the queen it doesn't matter right now. She's not here, and practically speaking, can't do anything to stop any of what's happening. So the regent in charge is essentially the queen right now, and she can sort of do what she feels like. And Phyro isn't really politically savvy. I had sort of wondered if we were going to find out that maybe he had grown in some way here and become a little bit smarter about the situation. And maybe there's a little bit of that, but it's just not as much as I was hoping for. So anyway, Phyro, he comes to the palace after a long time away, and he visits his sister, who is in the midst of this camera obscura that she has created in one of the open areas of the imperial palace. So behind the towers and walls, beyond the wall of tranquility, beyond the winding stream that separated the administrative portions of the palace from the private quarters of the imperial family, was a garden. A secret world within a world, a hidden pool of serene nature amidst the hustle and bustle of the booming capital. Here, Emperor Ragan had once tended to a small rice paddy to remind himself of his origins as the son of farmers. Empress Rasana had entertained the imperial children in a winding hedge maze full of fantastical surprises conjured by her smoke craft. And Empress Gia had kept an herb garden, complete with a shed modeled after a Kokru medicine shop, in which she had plotted the downfall of the great lords of Dara who had fought to secure an empire for her husband. The rice paddy had long since been filled in, and the hedge maze raised. In their places were more gridded plots of herbs, hothouses cared for by teams of servants around the clock, and terrariums and cages housing exotic insects and animals with medicinal properties. Empress Gia's favorite pastime had taken over the palace garden, much as her presence had taken over the dandelion court. So this is just a real, intense metaphor. It's really surprising to me, to be honest, that nobody put up any sort of fight over keeping certain areas of the gardens as they were in memory. But ultimately, even if they did, she would just guilt them into doing what she wanted by saying that what she does is helpful medically, and that proposing they keep things simply for memorial value or aesthetic value is frivolous and impractical. That's just the way that I think Gia tends to operate. She's a manipulator, man. She's just really careful about couching whatever she wants in language that's passive aggressive and makes people feel like they have to do a thing in order to save face or keep their reputation up or what. And she's extremely good at sensing what is important to certain people and what to prey on in that way. So there was a moment of me being like, wow, really all trace of the things that weren't Gia are gone? That feels kind of almost a little bit too aggressive. And then I was like, no, actually it doesn't. That's Gia though. One particular corner of the garden showed the hand of someone other than the Empress. Blue orchids and poppies, cerulean hydrangeas and irises, cobalt lotuses and periwinkle peonies, special varieties that had taken generations of Dara's horticulturalists to breed true, filled the ground like a varicolored sea. Out of this floral water rose rock formations extracted from quarries and lake bottoms all across the realm, shaped into models of the islands. And on these rock formations were miniature replicas of the geography and civilization of Dara. Waist-high mountain ranges with salt-tipped peaks favored by squirrel mountaineers. Looming cliffs weathered by paintbrush and draped in delicate ivy and morning glory vines. Favored haunts of sparrows that seemed as large as gyrinophins in scale. Shield volcanoes about the size of pot lids, sculpted out of hardened dough by cake decorators from the imperial kitchen. Tiny porcelain versions of Pan, Ginpen, Muning, and Karusa, each painted with such detail that it was possible to find another version of the palace garden inside the model of Pan, about the size of a bullseye. In equal measures, childish and refined, meticulously crafted, and adolescently imagined, who was responsible for this shrunken version of Dara? This sounds dope. Honestly, I want to see it. I'm just saying. So we jump from there to a conversation between the gods again. We're at Lake Tututika, and we have, and I'm trying to remember because the names of these gods always escape me, but it is essentially a back and forth here. Little sister, what have you been doing with your charge? She spends her days painting and singing, embroidering and making up logogram riddles, strumming the zither and playing the flute, going to the theater and penning poems about actors she fancies. And continuing on, sounds to me like she's just living the life of a young lady of wealth, Rapa and Kana. But she's not just an average young lady. What about preparation for war? What about the study of politics? What about honing her talents in the service of Dara? Why must everyone live a life of politics and war? Is the life of a coral reef shrimp any less beautiful than the majestic Reuben? She fills her life with the pursuit of beauty, and who's to say that isn't her destiny? Beauty, beauty, beauty. Can't you talk of anything else? There will be war. The treaty that has kept peace in exchange for tribute to the Liuku will last only 2 more years. Beauty is my domain, sisters. Besides, you have your charge, and he thinks of nothing but war and politics. I rather agree with Kiji that we should not act as though war is the only choice in the future of Dara, a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're making a mistake. We can't be avoided by withdrawing into art. Beauty isn't worth much when the spear storm strikes. I find this really interesting because, as you guys all know, I am about the aesthetic. Beauty is of huge importance to me. And I have struggled a lot with the feeling of it being a frivolous, impractical thing to focus on and judging myself pretty harshly for it. And there was a period in my life where I was involved with some real crunchy types. And I gave up a lot of my possessions and sacrificed a lot of what was actually important to me in order to prove that I wasn't materialistic or shallow. And I look back now and feel so saddened by that because there is such a judgment about carrying. If you care what things look like, and if you care about making a place comfortable and beautiful, it is really seen as a weakness versus anything. It's not almost ever really seen as virtuous, except in the context of making something feel more homey and domestic. If you're like a woman who is taming a man, that kind of thing. Like if it's in the context of a woman raising children and making a house a home, then fine. But a lot of the time, when characters focus on appearance in any way, it's just seen as like, well, that really indicates they're not somebody to be taken very seriously. And what I find so interesting is that in these books, we have actually seen how important the appearance of things is to the reality of things. And even later on, there's a moment where we're with Gia and she's thinking about how Kuni understood political theater and how important that was. And a great deal of political theater relies on appearance and what impression you're giving. But the thing is, and this is the exact thing that I think a lot of young women especially will run into, even though there is such importance assigned to our appearance, and we know that there is, and we are judged by it, and people make no bones about the fact that we are judged by it, we are also not supposed to care that much about it. Essentially, what we are taught is that you have to be beautiful, but it has to be effortless. If you go to the gym, if you diet, if you wear makeup, if you wear clothing that is revealing in any way, don't be too public about it. If you go to the gym, don't talk about it. If you diet, pretend you don't. Pretend to eat burgers because otherwise people will think that you're just one of those girls. And dress revealing enough because like you shouldn't be a frump, but like not too revealing, and wherever that line happens to be is just completely up to whoever. And it's so frustrating to me that we all can collectively admit appearances are important. The vibe you give off is important. The overall impression you make on people is often derived 80 to 90% off of how you look. And yet, if we admit to really caring about how we look, that is seen as beneath us and a flaw to be corrected. And I have just struggled with this my entire life, you know? Because like I said, that shit is very important to me. You wouldn't walk into my office and not know it. I mean, it's very clear. But it's taken me a long time to be able to like really admit to myself how much it matters. And this girl being allowed to just indulge in creating beauty and art, and the author, it feels like really trying to emphasize that that has its place and is also important. I really appreciate that being acknowledged. And I don't mind that there's an argument about it, because this is how it is. People are going to always say you shouldn't be wasting your time on that when there's like real important problems. But that's the thing about art, is that there's never a good time to make art. You don't just do it when you're in the vacuum of a perfectly serene day and tons of free time. Art is about living life. Art is about reflecting the times that you live in. And so if nobody living through strife and war ever made art, how odd would it feel, you know? And that's not to say that perhaps the production of it goes down if people are fighting and, you know, struggling just to survive. But art has a really important function that's taken so for granted. And especially in the world that we live in today, in the last like 10 years, where so many people have moved to the internet as a place of business, art is like simultaneously the most valuable commodity to use to try and capitalize on, but also so deeply undervalued that the idea you have to pay for art is seen as sort of presumptive. How dare you expect me to pay you for your time and effort that you put into this thing? And I just find it so wild how we can simultaneously spend so much time looking at beautiful photographs and sharing them, sharing excerpts from a beautifully written passage in a book, or a clip from a really affecting moment in a movie or a TV show. And then we find out that's what somebody does for a living. And we are like, so what's your real job though? You know, and it's just something that sinks in so much. And I know that with my job being what it is, I am an entertainer, and I do something that is not crucial to the economy at all. And it's certainly like, I often struggle with the fact that I'm not actually creating this art that I'm talking about. I'm creating a moment in which I'm talking about it, which feels so esoteric that I question whether what I do has value every goddamn day, like all the time. And it's just a shame, you know. I wish that we could give credit for what we consume without thought and without really appreciating the profound effect it has on us. Anyway, I just thought that this was quite a moment that like spoke to me personally. And this little girl sort of struggling, and she's not too little at this point, I guess, but she's still very young. Her wanting to like be at a level that she isn't yet. Yeah, I can also sympathize with that. So a shack of unusual design stood in the middle of the floral sea, surrounded by the miniature islands. And what this is, long story short, is the camera obscura that this chapter is titled after. And it's a solid world was reduced to a flat image, and planes and lines contorted through perspective to evoke volume with a precision unmatched by even the greatest painters of Dara. For this was the work of the gods, a painting of light that had no mortal eye, or brush could ever hope to replicate. And we have a 18-year-old young woman kneeling and trying to capture this work by painting over this like projection. And she gets interrupted by Phyro coming in. In his 20s, broad-shouldered, dark-complected, Hair straight and black, he showed more of his father's Kukru heritage than his mother's Araluji origins. And he is like, he wasn't really supposed to be here this quickly. When we were in Gia's head, it turns out this is kind of an unwelcome thing that he has showed up. He said, I decided to come to Pawn at the last minute, and then starts to explain why, and is like, never mind, you don't care about that. And I'm going to have to sort of rush through this interaction because I'm running out of time. I spent so much time talking about this other thing. But they sort of go back and forth about the importance of being politically and war-minded. It's the same thing. Like, the gods were talking about this, and then the two of them wind up actually talking about this in life. And she talks about how Gimoto, who I believe is the one that everybody seems to worry Gia might hand over power to. They begged me to show a few of my paintings. I brought them out. Everyone was complimentary, but Gimoto said they showed no craft. I could have done this when I was 3, he said. That gourd looks like a baby's behind. It was humiliating. And Firo very gamely tries to sort of like gas her up and be like, he just wishes he was as good as you, a little bit later after they've gone through things. And she has to stop him and be like, look, dude, I totally appreciate that you want me to feel good about myself and that you don't like this guy, but you don't know anything about art. And so I have to take everything you say about how good I am with a grain of salt, and you may as well just save it. And honestly, I found that really funny because I've often said how the adulation of lots of people will tend to not have much of an effect on me because I don't trust the opinion of most people. People saying, oh, this was really good. I'm just sort of like, yeah, well, how do you know though? A lot of the time, which is a sort of weird attitude to have. But then if one person who means a lot to me says, you're really good at this, that will sustain me for literal years. So, you know, sort of has its double-edged sword there. And let's see. Oh yeah. There's certainly a lot of effort devoted to making this painting studio comfortable. I wish she put as much effort into learning how to lead an army. Again, you know, like, come on. And when Fara says, what if she doesn't want to lead an army? Phyro is like, of course she wants to. What? She's Ginmazodi's daughter. And Fara is like, okay, you know what? I'm not doing this with you. We barely see each other. I'm not going to just spend the whole time arguing. But the idea that she didn't just inherit her mother's like warlike temperament and interests is completely impossible for him to understand. So she asks him, do you want to go and visit Father's tomb? And he says, I can't. I vowed never to show my face at Father's grave until I've avenged him, until I've freed the people of Rui and Dasu from the Ryukyu yoke. How can I face him if my promise remains unfulfilled? And she kind of is like, I get that you are important and everything, but that doesn't mean you need to not be a person and care that your dad's dead. And he says, that's not what I'm saying at all. It's just, I have an idea of how I want this to happen and I'm not ready to do it yet. So then we go to let's see, a dream, or is it a memory? I don't know if it might be a memory, but in a dream, if that makes sense. Gia is thinking about these two girls who have lived through this like horrific life of being subordinate in a way that even getting injured will get them punished or tossed aside. And what's so funny is that like this, in the context of this book, and a maid falls and breaks her arm and she just gets dismissed and replaced, sounds so completely cold-blooded. But when you look at how actual capitalism in the United States works and how few people have any health care and how there is no safety net for workers almost ever, that is genuinely, essentially what actually happens to people who injure themselves on the job. There are sometimes, workman's comp, but not always. And sometimes they won't allow you to prove a thing and not cooperate because they don't want to pay it. And even if you get some money out of it, it's not necessarily like you get your job back, because sometimes they will find a reason to let you go. Just this whole memory that she's having of these two little girls and how much they like and care about her, and how worried they are that she's going to just kick them out because one of them broke her ankle from how she fell. It feels so over dramatic, but it's not at all. It's just reality. So in the midst of this, all of a sudden, Kuni is standing there, and she eventually realizes that he isn't the real Kuni. He is a figment of her imagination, and she's able to hide things from him in a way that makes her feel a little bit more at ease, because she's worried that he can read her mind, essentially, because he's in her mind. And I'm this how can you hope to save the sheep without a good shepherd? A bad shepherd holding the slaughter knife may be 100 times worse than wolves. You seek perfection, but there's often no line between perfection and evil. Perfection is impossible, but to say that we should thus stop trying to do better is what makes evil possible. You speak of grand ideals, said Kuni, but even in the pursuit of lasting peace, blood flows and bones pile. You were happy to cross rivers of blood and walls of bones in your time. Views change with time and experience. I have many regrets. Do you never doubt? You were happy enough to have no doubt when you left me the dirty work of dealing with your haughty generals. Kuni sighed. Some debates had no answers. After a while, he said, You're plotting something. You remain the regent, refusing to yield to Phyro. You say it's because he's not ready, and the islands, all of them, need your peace. But are you certain you aren't moved by a less lofty reason? And she says, What do you mean? And he says, Timu's life will be at risk if there is war, but he's also a child of the House of Dandelion, and that comes with certain duties. Teeth on the board. I don't know what teeth on the board means. I will admit this. I was trying to understand within the context whether it means we're all pieces of a game with our function, whether it's supposed to be sort of cards on the table, I'm telling you the thing, or if it's just, it felt like he was saying we all have our roles, but I'm not positive about that. And the fact that he has said he's worried that she's just trying to protect Timu, she relaxes, because that's not it at all. And she feels glad that's the assumption that he's leaping to. And of course, we know what Gia is like. So she wakes up, and there are these two guys here that she slept with the night before. And it turns out that these two dudes, first of all, she doesn't even remember their names. And they were brought to her by Gimoto, ostensibly because they were learned Kashima who had discovered the annals of the ancient Tiro kings, yet more examples of virtuous queen regents who carried out the wishes of the people. At the private audience, they had been dressed in tight robes that showed off their figures well, and perfumed with the sort of expensive musk found in the best scarlet houses. They were so young that even the two of them added together didn't match her age. Most honored and august Aunt Empress, your humble child wishes you everlasting good health. Perhaps the vigor of these young men may contribute to that end. She chuckled to herself, imagining the look on the face of Tete Gimoto's mother if she found out her son thought this kind of gift was an appropriate way to demonstrate filial devotion. And what she intends is to basically use the fact that she's sleeping with various young men all over the place as a camouflage of what her true intentions are. No one suspected a ruler wallowing in sexual gratification of playing the long game. The liaisons fulfilled a certain expectation some people had of men and women in power, and under the fog of misdirected expectations she could plot without notice. So, yeah, this whole thing, like, I'm really wondering how well it's working if there are rumors she's going to be handing power to somebody else. Maybe that is her attempt working, in that people don't think she wants to hold onto the power herself and that she would even consider giving it to somebody else. But it still would be her deciding where the power winds up. And I don't know. So she's thinking about the dream, and the fact that she had it at all seems to be an indicator that she is not as certain in her path as she should be in order to carry it out. And she tells herself that some of her experiment fumes probably are what are affecting her. And I was like, okay. And she's thinking about Gimoto, and she calls what he does antics, and clearly does not take him seriously in any way. Yeah, here it is. Holding banquets in the prince's honor, rumors that she was thinking of designating a new emperor had spread. That was useful. She hoped it was enough to persuade Phyro to finally do the right thing. For the sake of the people of Dara, she hoped he would back down. So I guess she means to just stop the war and stop trying to, like, get vengeance. But I don't see it, Gia. I just don't. I gotta admit. So let me go to 16, Temple of Peakiji. And we are with, oh my God, what is the name of this guy? I'm trying to find the name, sorry. But she was standing at the foot of the statue, directing teams of native monks and nuns to clean the sacrificial hall. Make sure Peikiji's eyes really shine for the Peikyu. Absolutely, absolutely. The abbot paused in his climb and tried to bow to the head shaman. The effort made him almost lose his balance, and he grabbed onto the ladder again and squeezed the washcloth. It's just calling them the abbot and the head shaman, so maybe we don't get their names at all, actually, in this little back and forth. But essentially, this is the complete changing of the gods. And all of these people who had been worshippers of the original gods of Dara being conscripted to assist with the changes. And this abbot is sort of going with it and kind of feeling like everything changes. Nobody is immune to that. And I am just going to roll with it because that's sort of how the world works. And there was a part of me that admired that point of view. I expected to be in the head of somebody who put up a lot more resistance, but he doesn't. He's just oddly accepting of the fact that shit's just gonna change on you, and that's how you have to see the world that way, or else it's just pain, So then we go to Timu and his children. This was really awful. So, reminder, Timu was basically raped by his current wife, gotten drunk and forced into a situation and wound up married. It's this awful scene, and his father, I went back and reread the ending of the last book just to kind of refresh myself a couple of months back, and remembering how disgusted Kuni was with Timu. And in as much as he is disgusted, he's also trying to be patient and understand. But you know how much Timu feels like he has entirely let down his father. It's just such an awful situation. And here we really get to see that things have not gotten better. We have Diana and Toju. And these are two of his children. And Diana is a lot more like Timu. She is a lot more willing to accept the Dara part of her heritage, attempting to speak using Dara at all times, and respects her father's opinion. But Toju is absolutely disdainful of his father. Clearly doesn't want to acknowledge even that he is related to this guy. He wants to be full Ryuku, and the fact that he is related to anybody from Dara is a shame for him. And all he does is try to parade around, showing off all of the toxic masculinity features of the Ryuku. It's so funny because at one point, when we jump over temporarily to his wife's POV, she's thinking of how poorly Dara treats its women. And they certainly do. But the Ryuku have women on equal footing to men in some ways, and yet they still manage to be like toxic masculinity. Like, women have to display masculine traits to be respected. And I say masculine traits with the full understanding that when we say masculine traits, that's like loaded already and accompanied by a lot of conditioning and stereotypes. So I fully acknowledge that. But it just really seems like any sort of nurturing and sensitivity is discouraged in any way. And Toju 100% goes for that and is out here just smashing snails for no reason other than to be able to say that he did it to his mother when she shows up later. And meanwhile, Diana is actually able to like write in the language, and she's kind of a prodigy. And it's interesting because her brother does seem to respect her. He seems to like her. And when she tries to tell him, don't do this and that, he does listen more than I was thinking. It's his father who represents the like condensed Dara, the actual personification of it, that he's like, I don't fuck with him at all. And it's so sad because Timu has sort of resigned himself, I think, to not having any kind of real relationship with his son, and is watching him from afar at a couple points, looking at him like, I can't believe this kid's even related to me. What the fuck? And I can't imagine what that feels like. This is the sort of thing that makes me not want to have kids, because we all have these moments of like, you know, we see depicted in a lot of media some child that you like see a reflection of yourself. You can share wonderful things that you grew up with and preserve traditions that meant something to you by passing it down. There's all kinds of assumptions that we make about what your kids' reaction to certain things are going to be. And yeah, they are going to have their own personalities, but a lot of that will be informed by your opinion on things. And that means likely they will think and feel about a lot of topics the same way that you think and feel about them, which is very comforting. But a lot of people don't wind up in that situation. And we see that here, and we see it later with Thera. And feeling like you can't relate to your children, that they have a mindset about things that you just straight up don't even understand. That's the kind of distance that I think gets experienced more than we ever really show, you know, and I don't think parents who feel that way about their kids are out talking about it very much. So trying to say how often that might happen as compared to having a great connection where your kids care about the same things as you, it's hard to say, because I just don't think I think anytime somebody tries to say that they don't really understand or connect with their child, it's frowned on in such a way. People don't want to admit to it. But I worry about it, you know? The concept of raising children has a certain list of expectations, and I have seen enough of relationships that fall outside of those expectations to know how painful and isolating that can feel. And I've always just thought to myself, what if I have kids and it's like that? And, it's just, I'm not having them. And that's just all there is to it. So I don't have to worry about it. But I see things like this and it makes me so sad. Especially these children are the result of a relationship that began with rape. He didn't want to be here. He got tricked into this, essentially. And he talks about this a little bit later so Tom Vanaki has been talking to him about trying to be merciful with the peoples and their feeling. The people of Dara are trying to adjust to the Liuku. But of course, there is still resentment and there are still times where they are going to try and rebel. And he thought that he had convinced her to be merciful. And in her mind, she is being merciful. Because what happens here when she drops down to visit and they go off alone and talk, she has killed 165 people, an entire village, due to a rebellion. And when he is like, what the fuck? She says, they wanted me to kill every village within 30 miles. So this was actually the lesser of the two. And you need to appreciate that I have to have a firm hand or else everybody is going to try this. And he is of the opinion that having this firm hand is just going to remind everybody why they're wanting to rebel. And it's just going to make it worse, which I'm sure is also true. It's a real kind of, they're both right. And when he says, where are the children? We must find good homes for the children. And she is like, so they can grow up and become rebels too? I had all of them killed. I told you. Other than the collaborating Toko Dawiji, there are no survivors. And he really had thought that she would keep the kids around. And this is the thing with the Liuku, is that they go fucking scorched earth, man. Considering the fact that people will bide their time and generations before coming back and taking somebody's entire dynasty down, there's a good reason to be like, oh no, kids are not going to be around. That's not happening. But of course, Timu is much more like, killing children is a fucked up crime. I can't believe that that's how you decided to handle this. She's right in the practical sense, but Timu is much more right in the moral sense. The thing is, when you just decide to kill somebody's children, it's practical and like, okay, I'm going to forestall any future vengeance and retribution. But also it's like, I'm going to do this hideous thing because I don't want to face eventual consequences for what I did here. And honestly, that's cowardly. So he asks, what did the Naro do? Because she says that, some people killed him and they had to learn their lesson for it. And she finally tells him he raped 2 women in the village and killed one of them when she scratched his face. The 4 villagers who killed him were the dead woman's kin led by her grandmother. And he says, you should have punished the Naro. And she says, I would have if they hadn't killed him, but they did. So, and I found that really interesting, that she is actually understanding where he's coming from here and saying that she would have done things that way if they hadn't gone so extreme and decided that they were just going to kill the guy. And part of me isn't sure if she's telling the truth, and another part of me thinks that she's dead serious and she really would have punished him. I can't decide. I feel like it kind of would be depending on her mood. I don't know. So it basically winds up in a screaming match between the two of them, and her being like, I have been listening to your advice for too long, and it's made things look weak and vulnerable to the point that more people are going to be rebelling. we have defaced our gods to please yours, is the way she says it, which is just so funny because that's the opposite of what everybody else is feeling. And this is when he says, let's see, divide the population into tiers to grant someone privileges according to how much Liuku blood they have. That isn't what we agreed on at all. Have you heard how the Thanes speak of the Togatan and the Dararaki? Have you heard how they speak of our children? Togatan literally meant runts. It was a term used by the Liuku to refer to the children born from the mass rapes committed by the Liuku army against the Dara population during the initial conquest. Tanvanaki flinched, but she didn't back down. And yeah, she flinches because he's like, they're calling our children runts because you raped me and everybody knows it. And it basically ends with, I'm not compromising. Of course the Liuku have to be the supreme race here. That's the whole point of why we came here and my father's dream. And I'm not just betraying that because you want me to. And all of my Thanes and Naros have earned things by going through this war, and you want me to just take that away from them? That's not how any of this works. And they get interrupted at this point. And I just felt really bad here because Timu is in such a bad position, and he's trying his best to make some headway with her and mitigate some of the horrific bloodshed, but the position that she's in, you know? So I'm going to jump ahead a little here because I am running out of time. There's a conversation that she has with Noda Mi about some pirates, and she's trying to find the information about the Silkmotic force and decides that she's going to try a different tack to getting that information. But we jump into a conversation with the gods again, and they are going back and forth about the killings overall, and that Dara is suffering. And one is pretending to be delighted by all the bloodshed, and the other has to be like, first of all, you know this isn't what I wanted, even though you're acting like I should be glad because I am the god of war. And secondly, you're acting like this is fine with you, but I have seen how you have let ships and rafts full of Dara refugees through certain areas that they would never have ordinarily survived. So you clearly have a soft spot for them, and you can try and pretend you don't all you want, but the evidence speaks for itself. And then we go to chapter 17 called Moonbread. This was so hard to read, you guys. I hated this so much. Fara, we have jumped ahead in time. She is with two sons, and they're twins, right? Or is one older than the other? I can't remember. But she is trying to share with them a tradition of making this thing called moonbread, these biscuits, and especially ones that have lotus paste in the center, because this is a delicacy and it's served at the autumn festival, which is celebrated when there's about to be a harvest, which they're about to have, even though this is like summertime. And so she's trying to recreate this celebration and this ritual, even though the time of year isn't exactly right. And the ingredients are not to hand. They have to work really hard to like get things in place for her to even get the lotus seeds. And all of this is a major undertaking that means a lot to her. And she goes through all of this to make these for her kids, and they don't like them and they don't want to eat them. And it's not just, oh, we don't like them. It's, we don't like them. And our friends have told us that eating food like this is pitiful. This is like rabbit food. This is what cattle eat. We're supposed to eat meat and marrow and drink milk and kefir. And you're over here feeding us grass that's like pounded into a paste and mixed with weird shit. And this isn't what we're supposed to be eating. And they aren't that aggressive about it, but it's very clear. They are surrounded by Liuku children who feel this way, and that's what they're hearing. And their mother and her people are by far the minority. And we discover as the chapter goes on, many of her people have died from accidents involving trying to recreate kilns or smelting in order to share some of the like crafting that they do in Dara. So there have been all these accidents and a lot of people have died. So the Liuku are seeming to be coming out on top. And what's so painful about this is that Fara, as usual with these books, she is right and wrong. She is so hurt here because she is trying to share something deeply personal and important with her children, to hand it down and show them some of her life and her past. And they could not care less. In fact, there's almost a sense of them being afraid to partake because they'll be bullied for it. And then there's the fact that she has a real superiority complex. And Takval says this to her at one point. She says, I'm trying to teach them a better way. And he says, they might trust you more if you didn't always act like they're barbarians in need of instruction. And she says, I've done all I can to take care of the delicate feelings of your people. I've ordered my smiths to share with you all their knowledge about smelting and copper and iron and forging weapons without disparaging your bone crafting traditions. I've never asked you to put one of my officers in charge of your thanes and warriors, even though they must learn how to fight with these new weapons and care for them. I've not complained about my scholars and crafters laboring in the fields to feed everyone, while so many able-bodied Naros and Kulaks are sitting around idle, disdaining how to learn to farm. I've even scaled back the attempt to teach the Thanes how to write the Aegon language using Zindari letters because so many of you think writing is witchcraft. But if we're to challenge the Liuku, then you must learn new ways. And then, she says, it's not my fault that reality deems some ways better than others. Listen to yourself. Takval had had enough. Your people, my people, how can you possibly lead them if you in your heart if you don't think of yourself as Aegon? And this is what's fascinating to me. She wants him to think of himself as Dara and them to think of themselves as Dara. He wants her to think of herself as Aegon. Nobody is able or interested in thinking of themselves as both because that's not even a thing. This is too new, and a mix of the two isn't even out there. So what are they even to compare themselves to? And this whole, there's a whole thing with this, set of blocks that she made for her sons to learn how to use logograms. And it turns out one of them has given away pieces of it in exchange for bone. And this is something that she made by hand because it meant something to her. And finding out that they broke pieces because they were playing with them like blocks, and then another bunch of them were just given away. She's so hurt by this. And finally, logograms are boring, Tonto blurted. I hate reading. I don't want to read. Thera felt her heart break. She could not believe what she was hearing. How can you say that? Do you know that Zomi, Mama's dearest companion back in Dara, once so yearned for knowledge of the analogograms she would rather go hungry than to be denied another lesson? This is not Dara. Tears flowed from Tonto's eyes as he looked at her defiantly. And she just starts crying, and she winds up having a conversation with Thorio, which goes a lot better. Thorio finally gets through to her a little bit. The thing is, again, Thera wanting to share something that means so much to her, 100% understandable. This is literally what it's about, right? And I don't mean like raising kids. I mean life. Life and what's beautiful are moments where you can share something that you love that is important to you with another person. And they may not appreciate it the way you do or understand it the way you do or necessarily love it, but it's you getting to communicate something that you care about. And again, people take it for granted that their kids are going to be into a thing just because that's your image in your head of how this is going to go. And I just feel so bad because I have to assume that a lot of parents who immigrate from other countries to the United States go through this when they begin raising kids that they gave birth to in the US who have been surrounded by American kids their whole lives. And those kids have parents at home who can't relate to the majority of the people that child is otherwise involved with in their lives. It's a very weird experience. Like I had this and it was like really mitigated because my mother was white, but my mother was also super, super young when she had me. She got married when she was 16. She had me like right when she turned 18. So even to a certain degree of like her being American, there was an isolation to her being so young and people sort of looking at me away because of that. But my dad being Colombian and not speaking English as his first language and, you know, being very shaky on it when I was younger, and there being like a disconnect between him and all of my friends and teachers, I at least had my mother to lean on and be that connect. And with Fara, these children, their father is of the majority. So in a way, they're going to get the vibe off of their father that like he is in support of the Liuku thing as well, that their mother is looking down on. And these children are Liuku too. They are Dara, but they are Liuku. And the fact that she is trying to behave as if that part of them should be ignored is super unfair to them. And this is just like, it's such a mixed thing because like, you know, I started off talking about parents who immigrate to the United States, but that really isn't an accurate comparison because the two of them, they are not both from one place going to a new place. She doesn't even have the support of her husband. And these children are being raised by a parent who has such disdain for a major part of their heritage that she wants them to low-key not pay attention to. And that whole like paragraph about how I didn't make a big deal about this and that, it's all about how much knowledge we are sharing with you. All of the stuff that we tried to give you. We tried to give you art, and we tried to give you smelting, and we tried to give you farming and writing. And she isn't stopping to think at all about maybe the Liuku having something to offer her. Everything is by default better in Dara in her mind. And this like conversation that she winds up having about the fact that the Liuku think that farming is unnatural and it's enslaving the land. She says they have to change if they want to win. And Thorio says you're asking them to become like the people of Dara, but they're not. At least they're well fed. And Thorio says they say that rice and wheat bloat their stomachs and make them feel like fat cows. I can see why they feel that way. They miss the freedom of roaming. They crave the traditional winter feast where they could serve 10 different types of game. And Thera is saying farming is more efficient, hunting is dangerous. And Thorio is like, I understand that, but this is what they miss. This is how they grew up. And you also did something sort of impractical trying to grow this lotus just because you wanted to be able to make these cakes. And you did it even though it wasn't practical because it was something about your past that you craved. And Thera says, that's different. I'm trying to connect my children to their heritage while they pine after something that will threaten our survival. And she doesn't understand that the way they used to survive is their heritage. Eventually, Thorio is like, look, what do you think being Liuku even means? Because you're acting like of course they're Liuku, they were born here, but being Liuku isn't about who gave birth to them or about the land they're on, because they're nomads. They adopt child hostages and slaves into ranks and have children with them. That kind of thing doesn't matter to them. What being Liuku is about doing, being, knowing. And it requires practice and it requires play. And I really found that particularly fascinating. The idea that like the way Thera sees heritage is a much more constructed, fixed thing because of what she sees as civilization. And the concept of these people having their heritage mean something a lot more fluid in a certain way, not really occurring to her, actually makes sense. I don't know. I'm just like, I felt so bad because I want Thera to connect with her children, and I completely understand her frustration. Like, especially what she's trying to like share with them is a food and they don't like the taste. And I am somebody who loves to cook, and food means a lot to me. And if I put a ton of time and effort making something that was like a thing I grew up with, that was a big treat that I would get super excited about, and I shared it with somebody that I was so thrilled for them to finally get to try it, and they not only didn't like it, but didn't seem to understand any of the significance, it would devastate me, like kill me, truly. So her feelings on this, I totally get why she's so sad. And the reading and writing, like, are you kidding? But the attitude that she has about it all is really, she better check it, because she could damage these kids and completely ruin her relationship permanently. And she could ruin her relationship with her husband too. You know, like, if she can't claim to respect him as a partner, if she doesn't respect anything about his heritage enough to take it seriously beyond the, I'm trying to spare your feelings because you don't understand how much better we are than you, which is really what it sounded like. She has to approach it as, maybe what you have to offer is as important as what we have to offer. And I am just curious too, if they stopped giving food to the Liuku, like stopped handing over food from farming, if they just made it so, all right, go live your way then, would that be considered like an insult, or would it be respected as giving them room and space to live the way they want? I can't decide how they'd react. So anyway, that's the end of that chapter, but these were fascinating. I'm really loving seeing these discussions and the nuance of them and how difficult and emotional all of this is. It's so fraught, you know, just fascinating to me to watch it happen out in this fictional world, but be very, very familiar. All right, I'm going to wrap up, but thank you again very much to Kyle for commissioning this. I hope that you're enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.